Hi guys, it's me again, Kenneth, and I'm making free videos that teach quality engineering step by step so that you can build real skills without spending expensive courses. So we've now covered the philosophies of quality, the management systems, the ethical code that governs the professional conduct. Now we cover something that ties all of it together is the practice, the leadership. So none of the strategic plans, the QMS tools, or the ethical standards we've discussed execute themselves. So they all depend on someone actually leading people to carry them out. So Robbins and Judge defined leadership simply as the ability to influence a group toward the achievement of goals. And that's the thread running through everything today. So here's the roadmap for this video. So first we'll look what is leadership theory tells us and the leadership actual role in the quality, including the Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a tool of understanding what motivates people. Second, we'll cover developing, building, or organizing teams, why team matters, and three major types of teams used in quality work, and how to select team members and the support mechanism a team needs to actually succeed. Third, we'll walk through the Tuckman stages of the team's development: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. And finally, we'll get a very practical, specific step and leadership guidelines for an actual initiative from missions to completion. Okay. Um, so let's start with the definition on the screen from Robbins and Judge. So leadership is the ability to influence a group toward the achievement of the goals. So notice what this definition does and doesn't say. So it says nothing about titles, authority, or organizational charts. So it is entirely about influence and outcomes. So there are many different leadership approaches involving the personality and situation, but Robbins and Judge detail how main theory is worth understanding as a foundation. So first is the trait theory. It is the idea that personality and social, physical, and intellectual traits may play a role in differentiating leaders from non-leaders. So this is the older. So more intuitive theory is the idea that some people are simply born leaders because of who they are. And second, the behavioral theory. The idea that specific observable behaviors, not innate characteristics. So it may differentiate some leaders from non-leaders. So this theory is more actionable and practical sense because if a leadership is about behavior rather than fixed traits, it means leadership can be taught and developed. So not just identified in people who happen to be already have it. So this chapter or this video points to Robbins and Judd's text for a deeper detail on both of these theories. But the practical takeaway for the quality professional is this. So don't assume leadership is reserved for the people who are certain personality or a certain title. So understanding both theories helps you recognize leadership potential in team members who might not be fit for the stereotypes and helps you deliberately develop your own leadership rather than the waiting to discover whether you have the right traits. So let's define exactly what leadership actually does. So in concrete terms, before we move into team mechanics, the leader's role is to establish and communicate a vision and to provide the tools, the knowledge, the motivation necessary for individuals or teams who will collaborate to bring that vision to life. So this applies in any scale, an entire organization, or just a specific department or work group. So the chapter owns example, like for example, the leader of the quality engineering function is responsible for helping shape policy for the quality technologies deployed across the organization and for making sure department personnel are sufficiently qualified to actually support the use of technologies. So notice both halves of that, setting direction and building capability to execute it. An important note is the a leader may or may not hold an officially designated leadership position. So oftentimes, someone in work or group emerges as a leader purely because of their knowledge, skills, experience, or abilities. So leadership and title are not the same thing. So a good manager should be alert to informal leaders emerging within a team, regardless of their job titles. So teams also frequently include a distinct role, like the facilitator. This is worth calling out because it's easy to confuse with the leader, but they're not the same thing. The facilitator purpose is specifically to provide support to the team's effort while still allowing the team to maintain full ownership of its own decisions. So, in other words, the facilitator smooths the process, keeping meetings on track, helping surface everyone's input, without actually directing or owning the content of what the team decides. So that distinction matters a lot in practice. So a facilitator who starts making a team's decision for them has stopped facilitating and start directing. So which undermines the team's ownership of its own outcome. So a good leader tries to understand whether the person is coming from. So what makes them act the way they do. So in other words, understanding what motivates others. So good leaders recognize and apply Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's worth walking through the model since it's foundational to everything else in leading people. So the core principle is people are driven by their needs and wants, and all human needs can be roughly in place in a hierarchy. The critical mechanic to understand is this. Higher level needs are not relevant until lower level needs are satisfied. But once a need is actually met, it stops motivating behavior. um, a satisfied need doesn't keep driving someone forward. So leaders need to correctly identify which level someone is currently operating from. So starting from the bottom, level one is physiological, the hunger, the thirst, the sleep, the most foundational biological needs. Level two is the safety and security, protection from the elements and from predators, or even modern workplace sense, like job security and physical safety. Level 3 is socialization, belonging, relationships, connection with others, feeling part of a group. So level 4 is ego, recognition, esteem, status, and level 5 at the top is self-actualization, realizing one's full potential. So here's a genuinely important, slightly point that this section that makes. So many people never get their ego needs fully satisfied and therefore never experience a self-actualization needs at all. But all the great thinkers and leaders throughout the history are in fact self-actualized. The very practical leadership application is when you're trying to lead a less cooperative follower, it often helps the enormously to stop and think about what they need they're actually working right now. So someone worried about the job security at level 2 is not going to respond the appeals about achieving their full potential at level 5. So you have to meet people at the level they're actually operating from. So let's set the stage for the entire team, section for this topic. So let's say with some context. So let's say since around 1980, quality concepts and team concepts have moved in tandem through the economy. So they've essentially developed together, hand in hand. So teamwork is now described as a vital in government, space exploration, healthcare, education, and most profit-oriented business. Compared to a generation or two ago, control of a project or process has generally shifted from a single individual to the team level. So this is not the minor stylistic change. It's a structural shift in how organizations get work done. So why did this happen? The drive for excellence includes better deployment of people at all levels. So workers at every level now expect to have some say in designing and implementing change. And the chapter makes a strong claim here. So not only change can quality actually improve. Managing an organization through teams has become, recognized as a core competency of the business in its own right, and not just to nice have. So there are many types of purposes of teams, each requiring different structures, skills, resources, and support. So leaders must be clear about exactly what they're trying to accomplish before choosing which team process fits their situations. A team-based environment might be initiated as part of the strategic plan or as a direct response to a specific problem the organization has encountered. So either way, there should be a defined process for planning and carrying out the initiative. So that process is often driven the steering committee focused specifically on driving business improvement and critically, like for example, for a member of management called the sponsor is typically identified, taking responsibility for initiating the guiding the team. The sponsor is usually the individual who owns the process or area where the team work is focused. So this is where it gives the real authority to remove obstacle that the team itself cannot clear on its own. So the chapter also identifies three major types of teams, so widely used in quality work. So it's worth understanding the specific differences because using the wrong team for a given situation is a common practical mistake. First is the process improvement team. So these are temporary teams whose mission is to develop a new process or improve an existing one. So they often cross-functional, pulling representative from multiple departments involved in process under study. Structurally, the management sponsor typically selects the team leader and then negotiates with the other area managers to identify the other members appropriate for the project's mission. So the chapter reference, like for example, figure 1.13, shows the shows that the team should integrate within the organizational hierarchy, essentially as the interlocking teams, where a leader at one level also participate as a member of the team, one level up, so creating a link chain from the front line all the way to the facility leader. Second, the work group. So this consists of the personnel who actually work in the particular department or process area day to day. So their mission is going to monitoring and improvement of process performance, and they typically on a regular cadence. So this chapter example is weekly. Let's say to review indicators and identify any need actions. The work group leader is usually whoever holds supervisory responsibility for the process area already held. Sorry. Let's go back. Um, okay. So this slide is the selecting team members. So it is also vital. So it draws a direct comparison to selecting players for, let's say, for a sports team, because it's the same underlying challenge, like matching people to roles that require specific skills and mindset. So the primary determinant of who participates is straightforward. Is this the person actually like involved in the process to be improved? So that's the baseline filter. But beyond the that baseline, several other considerations often come into play. Like for instance, a process improvement team might not be very effective if the team member has a same personality style. So this also like specifically reference to a personality evaluation instrument like Myers-Briggs Type Indicator or MBTI. To check for this and intentionally build a more diverse mix. So some deliberately include someone from entirely outside the practice area. So specifically because the person can bring a more subjective or different viewpoint that the insider might miss, and the supplier or the customer's personnel are often invited to participate directly whenever their input is considered, especially to the valuable to the outcome. So once you have the right mix of people, the team still needs a specific functional roles filled, because there are distinct activities that must actually get done in any team effort. So analyzing process data, minimizing disruptive conflict, monitoring whether meeting time is being used effectively, and maintaining records of what the team has actually done. So two of these get formally named roles, like the timekeeper who monitors the meeting time effectiveness, the scribe who maintains the records of the activities, and assigning these roles explicitly rather than give them a chance is a small choice that meaningfully improves how a well team, actually um, function, meeting to meeting. So, team-based improvement requires more than just creating a team. So it requires providing that an adequate support to actually succeed. So this chapter lists four specific categories of support, and I'll expand of each real detail from the text. Firstly is equipment. These face-to-face teams need real meeting space and equipment like tables, chairs, projectors, whiteboards, plus access to computer hardware and software to document meeting minutes, analyze process data, and prepare presentation materials. So virtual teams have their own equivalent need, and the chapter specifically names the software like Microsoft Teams and modern tools for that. Next is training. Unless an organization is extremely lucky, most employees put into a team will not already have all the skills needed to participate effectively. So that includes skills like how to plan and run an effective meeting, how to analyze process and data, and how to make group decisions based on consensus rather than just deferring to the loudest voice in the room. So the organization has to determine the specific skills required, assess current skills levels, and then actually provide the opportunities to close that gap. So training is not optional infrastructure here, so it's a load bearing. So management sponsor, the third one. We introduced this role earlier, but it's worth restating why it belongs to the support list specifically. The sponsor role is a vital leadership function that goes well beyond the simply launch a team. So it includes staying in a regular contact with the team leader to ensure the sufficient progress and resolving conflict issues with other parts of the organization. So the sponsor typically has the authority to cross organizational boundaries that ordinary members would otherwise have to negotiate themselves. So which lets the sponsor resolve certain types of issues much faster. And the sponsor is ultimately responsible for the effective implementation of whatever the team commands. The buck stops with them is not the team. Number four is the system change. So this is a supportive mechanism most likely to be overlooked, and the chapter is blunt about the risk. So setting up a new team in organization when the organization is not adequate designed for this way of working. So in its words, a prescription of failure. So an organization is a system. So meaning changing one part affects the other parts. So if the dominant management style is autocratic and the people are rewarded for competing against each other, rather than cooperating, so teams are unlikely to work as an effective mechanism. So no matter how well intentioned the team launches is, before the team process, leadership generally has to consider what the systemic changes are necessary to align the rest of the organization and how team success will be actually be recognized and rewarded. That is called out especially important. So each new team is really a new mini organization, and it will progress and often regress through the traditional stages of group development first described by Tuckman in 1965. So let's walk through each stage with the real texture for this chapter. So stage one is forming when the team members first begin to meet. Each person brings their individual identity and perspective of their own environment, like the own functional area. Even the people who have been on the other teams before find each new team in a unique experience and individual often approach it cautiously uncertain how they will perform in the new situation. So during forming, a team usually clarifies its mission, specifies what roles need to be carried out and who will perform them, and defines the rule of acceptable behavior. So it is called norms. Stage two is the storming. So team members start to realize that the actual size of the task in front of them. So they're still thinking primarily as individuals at this point and often to shape decisions to their own personal advantage rather than the considering impact on the other members. So typical storming behaviors include like arguments, testing, and leaders' authority, and attempts to actually change the team's missions. Stage three is the norming. So individual begin shifting their focus from personal concerns toward helping the team meet the challenge at hand. So interpersonal conflicts and the pull of external outside the team loyalty start to matter less. So as a member realize how interdependent they are actually. So they become more willing to discuss differences of opinion, specifically to understand them and how they might affect the team success. Stage four is performing. The team has matured into a smooth, cohesive unit. So members trust each other and understand each other's strength and weakness and how they support the missions and are now able to work through the group conflict productively. So there's a greater appreciation for the team's own process. Members are more satisfied being part of the team, and this is the stage where the significant progress toward the actual goals are made. So it's worth flagging that these stages represent a logical sequence over time, but the actual progress varies a lot the team to team. So a team reach a stage three or four can fall back to stage one or two if members discover that the previous assumptions about one another were not true. So if membership changes due to something like a job transfer. So some teams never progress beyond the early stage at all, either because the project is too short or because the team cannot successfully resolve it by the group because of their dynamics issues. And finally, stage five is the adjourning, which was added to the original model of 1977 by Tuckman and Jensen. So these represent team disbandment. So the team members often will feel genuine happiness at the team's accomplishment. So, but there's also frequently a real sense of sadness. The chap this topic also phrase it as a death of the team. So team development overall can be enhanced by making sure members understand how to interact positively and deal with difficult people or situation. That is like contribute to the team's goals and give or receive constructive feedback. And a facilitator can be simply commenting on a team's progress by, during meetings or through special interventions like simulations or outdoor exercises that build familiarity with each other's styles and strengths. So a quality engineer is frequently called on to lead specific quality initiatives. So improving an existing product or service, resolving supplier performance issues, addressing field performance failures, implementing new measurement technology, or pursuing ISO 9001 registration. To the name the chapter's own examples. So the chapter offers a five-step recommendation for leading this initiative, and it explicitly notes that most of these steps apply whether or not the project is team-based because by definition most initiative will influence others in the organization or the supply chain, so the rules of the others should be considered throughout regardless of the team structure. So step one is ensure that the project mission is clear, expected results, timing, limitations, and the reporting structure and methods to be used. Obtain the supporting data that indicates the project's value and determine how it relates to the bigger picture, the strategic plan, other projects, or day-to-day operations. Step two is to determine who the other players in the project will be and make contact with them individually. So this is deliberately personal, one-on-one contact. So the goal is learning their actual interest in the commitment to. So the project, so not just noting their names on the organizational chart. Step three is define the technical process and the time schedule to carry out the initiative. So the example are instructive. A problem-solving project might use as a seven-step problem-solving process. So while a Six Sigma project would use a DMAIC process, which we'll cover in the more detail in the later material. Step four is the execute the project according to the process just defined, involving as appropriate along the along the way, and keeping the management informed throughout. So not just at the beginning and the end. And step five is evaluate the outcomes of the project against the original mission you defined in step one, and make sure everyone involved receives a appropriate recognition for their contributions. So the chapter is careful to note that most of these five steps are really just basic, solid project management, but it adds an important caveat that leads to directly into the next slide, which is a significant portion of the initiative's actual impact will also depend on the quality of leadership demonstrated throughout the project. So process alone is not enough. So there are six guidelines addresses the leadership quality that a good process alone cannot provide. So let's take each one seriously. So because they're deceptively simple to state and genuinely hard to practice consistently. So one, ensure that everyone involved understand the mission, the goals, and the project objectives, and how team fits into the bigger picture. So this sounds obvious, but misalignment on the exactly this point is one of the most common reasons initiatives quietly fail. So people executing tasks without understanding why those tasks matter. So two is understand everyone's involved. Every person, every organization will have their own priorities, perspectives, and the skills. So learn what those are, recognize the validity of the differences rather than treating them as obstacle, and find ways to actually integrate them effectively into how the project runs. Three is be aware of your own strengths and weakness as a leader and how they can affect the project success. So find ways to learn from and utilize the skills of others to compensate for your own gaps. And just as important, provide as many opportunities as possible for the other project personnel to use their full capability and develop their new skills of their own. So leadership development is not just about you. Four is understand all your team members' strengths, weakness, and personalities well enough to actively lead them successfully. So this connects directly back to the mushroom hierarchy of needs and the personality diversity point from the team selection. You cannot lead people effectively if you don't understand what's driving them. So five, and the it states that this one of the real emphasis is communicate, communicate, communicate. So the reasoning given is precise and worth repeating exactly. So people tend to feel gaps in their understanding with their own bias or fears, and that's how rumors start. The leadership lesson is that silence is never neutral. If you don't fill an information gap with the truth, someone will fill it with speculation. And six, be a role model by emphasizing and demonstrating the importance of high quality work of yourself. You cannot credibly ask a team to hold a standard if you don't visibly hold yourself. So one last note for this chapter is worth mentioning. A quality engineer will also frequently be called on the technical advice on specific methods like conducting a process FMEA, and even the engineer is not in a formal leadership role for that engagement. They still need to understand these same leadership principles because influence and trust matters just as much in advisory capacity as they do when formally leading a team. So let's bring this chapter together with five closing points. And I'll expand it. So first, leadership is influence toward a goal, and the title or formal position is not required for it. So we saw both in the definition itself and the practical reality that leaders and facilitators often emerge from the knowledge, skill, and experience rather than the organizational chart box. Second is meet people at their actual level of Maslow's hierarchy, not the level that you wish that they were operating from. So a leader is trying to inspire self-actualization in someone's who's actually worried about the job security is speaking past them entirely. So diagnosing the real need is the first step to actually motivating someone. Third is match the team with the real need, a temporary process improvement team, like the ongoing work group and a highly empowered self-directed work that solve different problems and picking the wrong structure for actual situation. For instance, like standing up on a heavy SDWT for a short-term problem or trying to run long-term ongoing improvement effort as one of the off-project team. So sets the effort for friction from day one. Fourth is expect the full Tuckman sequence like forming, storming, norming, performing, and eventually adjourning. Sorry, that was fast. And expect regression too. So storming is not a sign your team that has failed. So it's a normal, predictable stage. And knowing that in advance helps a leader to stay patient and keep steering rather than panicking when conflict shows up. And fifth is the solid process, a clear mission, the right players, a defined method, a disciplined execution and honest evaluation gets the initiative organized. Um, but it's generally the leadership guidelines. Communication above all, plus a visible role model for quality work that actually determine whether the initiative succeeds. So process and leadership are not substitute for each other. So you need both. And this chapter is really how they work together. So I hope you enjoy this video and give you more value about quality engineering. I see you in the next lesson. Bye bye.